Hey, turn your mic way up, Dan. You suddenly got really quiet, like more than usual.
How's that?
Do it now. Talk.
Hello.
Turn it up more.
Oh, sorry.
Way too. Oh my God! Now it's too loud.
How about now?
Well, hello there, FC Dallas Curious fan, and welcome to another episode of Third Degree, the podcast. Hi, I'm Peter, and I'm joined by my two good buddies, Dan Crooke. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, really confused. I was looking forward to a busy final day of the window, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be a busy one.
And your hero and mine, editor and founder of thirddegree.net and the Dallas Morning News, Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hello, Peter. Today I'm calling in from Orlando, where apparently I was confused about what day the game was.
Yes, you're there the wrong day. May I highly recommend Harry Potter World at Universal. That'll be a good use of your time.
It's really good.
You may, yeah, sure.
I have not actually been there. I've just heard good things about it.
I have. It's really good.
Okay, awesome. Right. Did you buy a magic wand?
No.
Why didn't you buy a magic wand?
Because I'm an adult.
But you went to Harry Potter World.
I have a Marauders map.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then.
The dragon was cool.
I'm sure the dragon was super cool.
Peter, before we get started, I just wanted to mention that per fan request, I have created a Patreon account for people that would like to support this podcast and everything we do. It's at patreon.com/third degree, like the website, 3RDDEGREE. A lot of people may not know that we don't get compensated by the Dallas Morning News for our work. And lately, we've tried to add some content outside of the paywall for everybody, including this podcast, which we hope everybody enjoys. And also the reporting we do on Twitter and Facebook and such places as that. So we created the Patreon to give people a chance to support our work. If you like what we do, feel free to contribute as much as you like, as much as you feel it's appropriate. And if not, that's fine too. We will continue to do what we do, and hopefully everyone will continue to enjoy our content.
So because of my schedule, I'm sorry to the both of you that we are recording this deep late on a Wednesday evening. Buzz and Dan, I am going to ask the question, have we all just come to the shared agreement that we all collectively are fans, are Charlie Brown, Dan Hunt is Lucy, and the promise of a beautiful transfer window of fun and excitement is the football?
Yeah, absolutely. That's no question. That's what happens. Dan always is, I say, is very optimistic that all these great things are going to happen. And as always happens almost every year, it's just one guy. Sometimes it's impactful, sometimes it's not. In this case, so far, it's not. So yeah, it's the Lucy Charlie Brown again.
Yeah. Every year it's even in the media we hear the fans' excitement, and we take the little run up and we just try and kick that cloud of dust.
Man, I even have to admit, even I bought into it just a little bit. He was so cocksure and absolute on the multiple occasions. He said we're going to have impact players and there's going to be 2 to 3 of them. And then just jerked the football outright from beneath us. When I saw John Arnold's article in the Dallas Morning News, it said, Luchi is just admitting, this is pretty much our roster. And I thought, that's not the answer I wanted to hear.
Well, how long now have we been talking about or hearing about the idea that Bayern Munich might have a player that Dallas could use? That's been going on a year and a half, I think. We've been hearing that story. Yeah,
and that's a different question for another day and more in depth about that relationship. But it does beg the question: was that also oversold to the fan base that this relationship would be fruitful bi-directionally? And the fact that we've now gone 2 complete transfer windows and just absolutely nothing coming this way. And if that's the case, A, was it oversold, or B, did Bayern Munich make a promise that they have just chosen not to deliver on?
It was definitely oversold, but I mean, you've got to look at it this way. It's a development deal, right? If a player comes from Bayern Munich, it's going to be someone from their under-19s that no one's ever heard of, but hey, they play in Europe. Let's get excited. It's not going to be, one of the guys that played in the World Cup 10 years ago and is, gracefully retiring to some far corner of China.
But did we? But did we want a Ribery or the other dude whose name is totally falling off the back of my Robin? Yeah, did we really want either one of those guys? I mean, I know that would be exciting.
Any of us three? No.
Okay.
Many fans, yes, because it's just a big name.
Yeah, I would have been far more excited about some 18, 19-year-old from, Belgium that they've had in their academy for a while. I would have been way more excited about that, but that's just me.
Yeah, you want someone that can come in, make a difference, and hey, if they're winning the Champions League in 5 years' time, you can say they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for FC Dallas.
All right, so then the question becomes: are we just done for? Or, I mean, it's the window's done. We all probably should have been completely, utterly prepared for to be done. Buzz, the roster is what it is. What happens now?
Ooh, what happens now? Well, they got a couple of spots open. I think that one of those spots may go to a recall of one of their loan players, probably a Tuahene. And then if they feel like they need some depth down the stretch, they might add a North Texas player for some depth. But that's really it. If you're talking about roster moves, that's what it's going to be. This coming into this season, we all three have talked about this several times. This was a season of Lucci finding his feet and not experimenting. That's the wrong word. Seeing what he has on his team that fits what he wants to do, of evaluation, if you will. So while some things happened, some things he knew ahead of time he was doing and they did over the winter, but really like the deep evaluation of the roster is this season. So it's going to be this window coming up that you're going to see some movement out and you're going to see some movement in. And when he and I talked today, the two players that he mentioned, not by name last week, he said today that they just reached a point where financially it didn't make sense to try and bring them in for, it wouldn't even be 10 games. It would be like 5 games. So they've just basically pushed them to, and again, I don't think it'll be both, probably one or the other, and probably this winter whatever it was they were doing now is going to happen this winter instead. So, there was a lot of activity. They did do a lot of talking and they did do a lot of reviewing of video and trying to decide if they were going to pay to get somebody now. And in the end, they just decided to just finish with what they have. And as he said, see how far we can go with this group, and then we'll regroup and take the next step.
So, Dan, do we all just have to accept that the front office and the coaching staff has essentially washed their hands of the 2019 season?
Yeah, it defines really what you think giving up on the season is. Obviously not challenging for the Cup or the Shield. Now, really, every team in the league should be challenging for the playoffs at least, which is, in some way challenging for MLS Cup. If you don't think it is, then by all means feel that they've given up on the season. Whatever they do, they're going to do it with the team they've got at Toyota Stadium now. Should they really be one of the 7 best teams in the conference? Yes, absolutely. It's not really that great a conference. But they've got an important couple of weeks coming up with Houston and Minnesota on Saturday.
But Dan, do you honestly think they are a playoff caliber team, that they are a top 7 team? Portland, Houston, Kansas City aren't going to match them or leapfrog. I mean, Portland is 2 games in hand on Dallas. Houston has 1, and Sporting has 1.
Yeah, they are. They are one of the 7 best teams in the conference. That's a playoff team.
Okay, all right. Buzz, do you think they're a playoff team?
I think the last 2 games have not been great, but I think if they make a couple of adjustments, I think then yes, they are a playoff team.
So let's talk about that. What do you think those adjustments would be?
The one thing is that I think the team has played much better with a single pivot. So I think they should go back to that, which is with 2 8s, the Paxton, somebody else combo. I think that really helps because what's happening lately is Paxton's getting double team. He's getting boxed. He's getting focused. So they got to figure out a way to get him a little help, which is to get another 8 in there. That's a big part of it. And then the other part of it is to vary their attack a little bit. You can't, always build solely from the back. Sometimes you have to counterpunch and play over the top a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That makes the defense sit back if they're pressing or mid block. It makes them be a little more hesitant to do that. And some of your best talent on this team is to counterpunching. Certainly Baji's best talent, if he has one, is to counterpunch, and Barrios for sure is. So, I think those two things. I think if you free up Paxton a little bit by giving him a little help, and if you counterpunch a little, I think that this team makes the playoffs. Now, that's a long way from challenging for an MLS Cup. I mean, they've got some problems that are bigger than what they are to actually be a legitimate top team. But I think that those small changes, I think, get them into the playoffs.
But you guys both agree, and tell me if I'm overreacting or I'm just being ignorant or whatever, that the fact that the transfer window turned out to be Edwin Jossi, who we'll talk about in a little bit more greater detail, and what a disappointment he's turned out to be here in a second, is really concerning considering all of the problems this team has.
Yeah, my early beginning of the season prediction was that they would be coming towards the middle part of the season, they would be like third or fourth, and then they would drop down a little bit, and then the window would happen, and they would get a piece that would help them. But then I also thought over the course of the season that the kids would mature a little bit, and they would find their way in Luchi's system better as he tries to implement it over the course of the year, and then they would climb back into the playoff picture and finish in that same sort of fourth place position. So I kind of still hold to that. Giassi doesn't look like a contributor, but I still think that the kids will play in a little bit, and I think that they'll continue to improve in Luchi's system a little bit. And as I say, with one or two things, I think that gets them back into the playoffs, which is where I was at the start of the season. Now, I know you weren't, so it's perfectly legitimate. The other side of the position, which you can take, is perfectly legitimate, is that they're not going to make this playoffs. And if they don't make the couple of changes that I'm talking about, I don't think they will make the playoffs. So, there's a lot to be determined.
It hasn't really worked with kind of sitting too deep. They haven't been able to connect passes from the midfield. It's that zone 14 hole that we always used to talk about just moved back a little more. And they've got to kind of figure out who the man is up front and stick with them, give them some confidence. Striker is a confidence position after all. So the worst thing you can do is start playing around, moving them to 10, moving them to the wings, swapping in and out. I know it's getting desperate when some people are like, "Hey, Cobra sucks, but maybe he could get a goal at some point."
I've decided that our good bald giant friend has just turned into the new Tex Hooper, and that the club essentially is using him for nothing more than appearance material.
A side funny story about that is that Kenny Cooper was at practice today, and I don't know if you guys remember, but like a year ago, he actually came into camp for a little while and tried to, say, "Hey, Luchi, give me one last run. Let me see if I can help you," or whatever. And so when I saw Kenny today, I told him, I said, they should have signed you back then, buddy, instead of Cobra. It would have been better off.
What was Kenny's reaction to that?
Oh, well, the same reaction Kenny has to everything, which is he smiled and laughed because the guy's a joyous fellow. But, yeah,
Did you just say he's Santa Claus?
Yeah, he is a jolly old elf. Yeah.
The Houston Hitman is Santa Claus.
Yeah, he off the field. Kenny Cooper is one of the most jovial, nicest people you'll ever meet. The guy's a saint.
He is
the guy who pinned Victor Bernardes down by his throat is Santa Claus.
He turns into a different beast on the field against Houston. All right, so now the sad part for the listener is that we won't be able to do too much dissecting of the loss in Orlando because of the blackout. Neither Dan or Buzz or the official FC Dallas viewing party had access to the game. The press box now has access. They've been running a live feed. At least they did last time I was in the press box.
They didn't last week.
Oh, well, in the room I was in, they had it. So I, on the other hand, am old and actually had an antenna installed in my attic many years ago, and I can pick up Channel 21 off the air. And I even have it attached to a DVR so I can watch the game in tape delay, which I did. And what I can tell all of you that didn't get to see the game was this was one of the most shockingly poor performances from Dallas, and it was clear and obvious that the death-defying humidity of Orlando did exactly all of the things that we all as fans hoped the arid heat of Dallas would do to their opponents, but never seemed to actually do. Orlando seemed to handle the humidity extremely well. Dallas struggled with it. The entire team looked really slow for most of the game. Orlando took a lot of advantage of it, and Luchi made the shocking decision to start Edwin Jassy in the game. And that is a really, really interesting unto itself, because I thought it was very clear that when he subbed in the game before against Real Salt Lake, and I think we even talked about this in the podcast, the guy didn't appear to have more than 10 or 15 minutes in his gas tank. The heat really sucked it out of him, and I was shocked that they would have tried to put him in, ask him to start his first game in the humidity of Orlando. And I have to tell you, Buzz, I was reading your practice observations that you published today, and I was delighted by your question about Jesse to Luchi and Luchi's answers, and we'll explain more about that why. But why don't you tell everybody what Luchi said?
Yeah, I asked him if Jesse was okay, because Jesse took part in training today. 100% looks fine. And he said, "You tell me," and chuckled. And then we had a discussion about how I didn't see the game. But then he said, "Okay, here I'm going to quote Luchi here for you." He said, "So it was weird. Look, the guy went down. He's holding his hip flexor, and he said he can't continue. But now he's feeling good 2 or 3 days later. It's something that's not normal. I'm not used to that, but we're going to assess it and see if he can compete to make the roster." So I shortened the back in the quote. He talks more about the battle to make the roster and if the guy has time to compete and all that kind of stuff. But that's not important. What's important is, and you can read between the lines of what Luchi just said there, is that they're a bit mystified too about what could possibly be enough to knock you out of a game. And now you're fine, 100% ready to go. So there's certainly a question there about what exactly is going on with this guy in terms of his mentality and where he is and how focused he is on this team and what the team's going to be doing going forward.
So, Dan, I'm going to ask you, what was it that I wrote you guys that I thought I was being... I wrote privately to the two of you in our chat room Saturday night after I watched the game. What was the very specific thing that I wrote you guys, or the general thing that I wrote you guys that night after watching the game?
Okay, and I quote, August 3rd, 11:57 p.m. Wow, you really did watch the game late.
I did.
I'm guessing Jassy gave up, not hurt. He didn't have 20 minutes in him last week. The Orlando humidity is crushing, and he couldn't take it. Plus, it's pretty clear he sucks.
You didn't have to throw that in there.
That's the tone that was in my mind when I read it at the time and now.
Yeah, so I wrote that because when I saw the incident happen, when he goes down, it's because he's won a ball and he's dribbled into Orlando's box. And for the umpteenth time in the 30 minutes he was on the field, he had the ball stolen from him relatively easily. And he went down, and then he just laid in the box. He just stayed there. And when they finally got him up and it was clear that they were going to have to sub him out, the camera took a shot of him, and he was holding his groin, and he looked like he had run 3 Ironman triathlons in that 30 minutes. He looked so tired and so spent, and he was soaked from head to toe. It was pretty clear to me that I didn't know in that moment if he had pulled his groin or not, but I was pretty sure that what was really going on is he just was out of gas.
Well, certainly given how quickly he's recovered and how quickly he's back in training and how quickly he looks like he's essentially, I say 100%. He looks like he looked before. I'll call that 100%. The one thing I will say about this kind of thing generically is that a lot of times players that come here from Europe in particular, come to Major League Soccer and specifically FC Dallas, assume that they're going to walk in and start and be the man and run the place. And that's not true. You know, this is a pretty solid league. It's not as good as EPL or whatever, but you know, the kind of players that Dallas can afford are not going to come in here and walk in the door and be the best player on the team. It just doesn't happen. So some of them react well and challenge and fight and claw, and some of them don't. And this seems like it might be a guy, and it's early, but this seems like it might be a guy who's not responding well.
Well, considering that night or the next morning he tweeted out to the fan base, hey, everybody, I'll be back stronger than ever, I felt kind of bad about my comment in the chat room because I thought, oh, wow, he really is hurt. But then to find out 3 or 4 days later he's at 100% full training, I feel somewhat vindicated in my guess.
I believe really at the time you just went, yeah, right.
When he tweeted that?
Stronger than what?
Right. No, it was unfortunate. And if I can pick up on that from watching on a television broadcast, I can only imagine what Luchi and the coaching staff must be thinking in this moment.
Well, I mean, you can go for yourself. You read it, and the fans that are listening can go read this quote on the practice observations, and it's pretty clear, reading between the lines, that Luchi, you can't. I'm not going to speak for him, but it sure sounded to me like he was kind of saying the same thing, that they're a little bit mystified by how you go from I can't finish the game to now I'm 100% ready 2 days later.
Yeah, I won't dive into dissecting the Orlando game very much. The humidity clearly took its toll across the entire team. There were several really odd, unfortunate moments in terms of defensive performances. The defense for this team historically has been very, very good, but Brisson had his bad moments playing on the right for Jesse. I'm not sure Ja'Cory Hayes had his best game for Dallas at all, and I think we're finding out just how. Again, this relates back to the last week's podcast. It is very clear to me this team misses Carlos Grazo more than any of us were probably prepared to think about when they sold him for a club record.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and we don't need to beat on a bush, but if you look back at the highlight packages, I watched those, and the mistakes on the goals, aside from some poor tracking coming from either wing, the play went right through the middle of the field, and there's some combo play there between Hayes and Servania in the first goal, and the second goal, I don't even see a midfielder within sight, and Reynolds is playing as a center back and overcommits, and Reto's left on an island, and there's nobody marking the guy. So it's right up the gut that these problems were, and that's where Acosta was missing, and that's where, for this game in particular, and that's where Grezzo is missing, and that's the big blow. Yeah, that's the thing that will keep them out if they're not in.
Yeah, and it was some of the same things that were problematic in Orlando were the same problems that we saw with the situation against Salt Lake, whereas a lot of possession, a lot of passing around the back, just nothing once it gets past midfield, which does beg the question about this concept of luchi-ball. And I know we were asked, I don't know if it came in a direct message or an email or something, to kind of explain in more detail what the concept of luchi-ball is, how it's different than Oscar used to play, and maybe that'll help people understand what really is going wrong when they watch a performance like what happened against Salt Lake or Orlando.
Yeah, the short answer, and then for people like us that watch a lot of soccer, the short answer is they want to play like Liverpool or Manchester City. Klopp and Pep, those are the ideas. But if we can break it down into components, the biggest, most important part is the high press, because the idea is to pounce on mistakes and score. And as Klopp says, you can create more chances and opportunities to score from that than you can playing through a traditional type number 10 of the previous 10 or 15 years. That was the popular way to play. In the other cases, that other than the high press, of course, you have to be able to defend in a mid block or a low block, but everybody does those things. The other key offensive parts are that you have to be able to transition quickly when the ball changes possession, both offensively and defensively. So it's like, this is why you don't see a pure number 10, is because the guys they use, Paxton and at the beginning of the year it was Acosta or whoever, you have to be able to play defense in those high positions. So it's the entire 10 players goes from offense to defense at a snap. And that's really important. And in Luchi's case, part of the reason he talks about this team being good at defense is that it has a lot to do with playing defense by holding on to the ball. So tons and tons and tons of possession. If the other team doesn't have it, they can't score. That's part of that theory. A big part of it is the build from the back, which you see Dallas do consistently now very well. Their build from the back is fine. The problem, of course, is the final aspect of this game is that you have to have people that can play in the final third on the dribble, because you end up with this perimeter of players that are attacking the box. And you have to be able to go in there and be able to beat a guy or two and lay a ball off to the open man. And that's the aspect that's missing. And that's why they're not able to score as much. So that's my 2-minute version of what luchi-ball and tactics are. And that was pretty quick, but if you guys want to add anything to anything I missed that's a part of luchi-ball, there might be some things, some components that people would be interested in hearing if you have some add-ins.
Yeah, I mean that's the ins and outs of it. The only other aspects that Lucci kind of likes to talk about is rather than in previous seasons where we've just seen winger gets up to the end line, wing back overlaps. Lucci talks about more exchanges in possession, a little bit deeper, working the overlap and the underlap. We've seen Reggie get inside a little more. We've seen Barrios try and get inside. That sort of thing suits Mascara and Baji out on the left because they can cut inside onto their right and try and get a shot off. And then the other thing was, this isn't a tall team. Lucci knows that. There's no point getting to the end floating in crosses. Just drive them. They can take a deflection, win a corner. They can hit the keeper and go in. They can make the mark and Jesus can run onto them. It's as Buzz mentioned so many times, it's an attempt to get the ball to feet in the box that really hasn't been working too well. Even looking at the passing charts from the Orlando game, there were 2 forward passes aimed towards goal that actually connected. That's not really impressive. More often than not, it was get to the end line and try and blast it in, which, I mean, that's a really low percentage pass. That's more of, like Lucci's kind of aiming for when there's not a great option. Just try and make chaos happen.
Yeah, to follow up on what Dan's talking about, and when you play the luchi-ball kind of system, you have your 2 wings are now pretty high. You have your 2 8s or your 8 and one of your 6s sneaking forward right underneath your striker who should be in the box. And then you have your 2 outside backs that are coming forward, and they should be able to go inside and outside both. Now, all that requires players front to back that can dribble and are good on the ball and can transition both forward and back quickly. And specifically, what Lucci mentions all the time is what he calls breaking lines, which is when the defense is set up in their 4 and their 4, is that you have to be able to get in between them, whether you move in there on your own and then you pass through there, or whether you can dribble through there. If you have to be able to break those lines. And right now, the only person doing that is Paxton, because Paxton does what we often talk about, which is he does something unique or unexpected. Like when you're watching a player play, when he does something that makes you go, oh, because it's not what you thought was going to happen. He's the only one doing that. So when I talk about Paxton needing some help, is they need to get somebody that can either sit in between and help break those with passing or make some knifing attacks. And it's something they've asked Canada to try and do more cutting inside. Hollingshead does it on the left. Mascara does it a little bit. But Barrios, as much as we love him, he doesn't do it enough on the right. He goes to the end and crosses. But Barrios needs to cut inside more and take guys on, because you want 6 guys attacking that box and trying to break those lines. And that's not what happened. That's not what is happening. You're only getting one guy effective, Paxton, one guy, Santi, maybe 40% of the time is effective. And that's where your deficiency in the final third is happening. And that's why you're not creating any goals.
The question I have moving forward is, what do you think Lucci's plan is to solve his luchi-ball problem? Is it keeping with the same players that he's been putting out week in and week out and trying to and hoping that he'll get the best out of him? Or is there a path to maybe he's going to have to resort to trying some different players? Why not Thomas Roberts in the midfield and pushing Pax back a little bit? I mean, are things like that maybe a part of the plan?
Well, I think he gave away a little hint today when I asked him about Jesus, because he's been playing Jesus a lot as a sort of 10 type player, and I was curious to hear from him what he thought, what the reasoning behind that was and what they were looking for. And he said, I'm going to paraphrase it, but again, you can see the quotes on the side if you want. To paraphrase him, he says that they've discovered that Jesus is actually really good at sneaking between the lines, between the defense and the midfield, or the midfield and the little further back, and being a person that can make those connecting little passes. As he said, he helps them play from the back to the front, and that Ferreira, if I can say his name correctly, is going to be key to them in the midfield for the rest of the season. Okay, well, if you're going to play Jesus in the midfield, and we know Paxton's in the midfield, what kind of shape are we talking about? Obviously, we're talking about a single pivot, right? You're talking about two guys playing as sort of eights or quasi eights or whatever. Now, the other person on the team that can play like that, as you just mentioned, is Thomas Roberts. So Thomas is a guy that can dribble through and penetrate and pass and do both those things just like Paxton can. Now, of course, Thomas, over his last couple of games with North Texas, has started to dominate those games. That's good. That's the progression we wanted to see from him. But still, he doesn't put together 90 minutes yet. He has one or two moments that are let-offs, right? So if he can put together a 90-minute performance, then there's a chance that he could be impactful over the latter half of the year. But I really think the answer is from that question about Jesus Ferreira that Lucci told us the answer. The answer is going to be single pivot with Paxton and Jesus as your Manchester City-like dual eights with De Bruyne underneath like they play. And that's what you're going to see happen, which of course means that Jesus is not playing as a 9. So your friendly neighborhood Baji is going to be your 9 going forward. And this, of course, is also coinciding with Coleman return from injury. So maybe they're thinking Coleman will be your backup option as a 9. I know, but if you're grasping at straws and trying to find things happening, I mean, that's what you're doing as a coach. So that's what I think they're going to be.
Snake.
Yeah. Well, you're going to go with Pepe or Cobra. It's like right now, neither one of those. You might try Coleman, see how it goes. But, the short answer is Jesus in the midfield with Paxton.
See, here's my question, though. Well, I got two thoughts based on that. One is I'm assuming the single pivot 6 in this scenario is Brian Acosta, and that scares the crap out of me.
Me too.
And then two, if you didn't go out and for whatever reason, things didn't work out, you had the best of intentions of bringing a bunch of impactful players in and deals just fell through, I'll even give them the benefit of the doubt. But the fact that you didn't end up doing anything, especially when you saw deals like LAFC selling off Ramirez or some of these other signings that other clubs were able to pull off this week, and trades and so forth, my impression is maybe you've just given up on the idea of making the playoffs. Why don't you just throw Ricardo Pepi and Cerrillo and Servania and Paxton and Thomas Roberts out there and really give them, take the value of the rest of the season in giving all of your homegrowns experience?
You can make that case very well, I think. I was thinking about that today. Was if you're not challenging for MLS Cup anyway, why not do that? But, a young coach is trying to prove himself. He's trying to get as deep as he can. I get it. But I think there's a valid argument to the idea of just toss it and play the kids and go all in. Why not play Thomas Roberts for 10 games?
It just seems to make the most logical sense to me, but I don't. But maybe there's the competitive spirit of Lucci that he really thinks this team can still be not just a playoff team, but a team that competes and goes on some sort of magic run ride through MLS playoffs to MLS Cup.
Well, you do have veterans on your team, and if you go with an all kids give up lineup, your veterans are all going to stop playing.
Well, I'm not even.
So it's going to go super
but
bad.
I don't even mean that. You're still going to play Brian Acosta. You're still going to play Hedges and Ziegler, and Mascara is going to have to throw out his sketchy minutes in there, and Barrios too. I'm just saying you've got an opportunity to give Thomas Roberts regular minutes, to give Ricardo Pepi regular minutes, to give Cerrillo and Servania regular minutes. You don't have to do it all at the same time. But for goodness sake, let's all be honest, this thing isn't winning MLS Cup this year.
Yeah.
So use the value of the rest of the season to really give these kids experience in meaningful games.
I think you'll see some of that. I think some of those guys that are closest, I think you'll see Reynolds continue to get time. And, when you're playing both Ferreira and Paxton, you're going to have Thomas Roberts on the bench ready to go. because if you got to pull one of those guys, the only way to fit a dude in there that's the same is Thomas Roberts. So, I think you'll see him get some time. The Pepe, right now probably will go with North Texas again, but I'm sure they're going to want to try and see Coleman a little bit just to see what he's got. And then once Coleman, if he proves out to be nothing again, then I'm sure that the end of the season minutes are going to go to Pepe off the bench.
No, you know what's going to happen, Buzz. Coleman's going to return back, and he's going to go on the most insane scoring streak and prove us all wrong and make us all
10 in 10 games.
Yeah. Look like total idiots, and he'll wear a cape and become like the Frisco superhero.
And they'll have to pay him $1 million.
Right.
Wait, he'll be the lone construction worker?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, Coleman's a good dude. If he were to go back 10 to 10, fantastic. Sign him up.
Look, they're all great dudes. I'm sure,
Not all of them.
Well,
Coleman's a technically very good player, just not at that
Finisher.
one facet that dictates his job.
Yeah, that would be helpful. All right, so Dan, let's see. We've got a game coming up Saturday, 7. Oh, look, it's another 7 p.m. on the hottest Saturday we've had all year against Minnesota United. Boy, we're totally going to utilize that heat to our advantage against the guys, the Nukes from the north, right?
No, have you not seen FC Dallas miss out on that kind of thing, tire out before teams from cold parts of the country?
No, I'm not familiar with that concept.
I'm questioning how many people will actually get the Nanook from the North reference, Peter. Not that I didn't applaud you internally for it, but I bet most people will miss that.
I'll let Buzz explain it to you.
Yeah. It's one of the early monumental documentaries in the history of filmmaking that sort of established a lot of the norms of documentary style. But Nanook of the North.
Oh, you broadcast professional.
Yeah, you can tell who went to film school around here.
Wow, Minnesota are still on a frightening run.
What do you mean?
Oh, they had that 9-game unbeaten run, threw a couple of ties in, beat Portland again to get to the Cup final tonight. Oh,
that's right. They're in the U.S. Open Cup. Are they going to get to host it? Do we know that yet?
No, it's going to be Atlanta.
Is that official, or is that like a coin toss thing that still has to happen?
So they decide a rank, like a priority order, so beforehand. So if Atlanta made it, no matter what they were hosting, the only team that couldn't host was Portland. So yeah, Minnesota's got to go down to Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah, so they have a Wednesday sandwich with FC Dallas in the middle because they have Colorado next Wednesday. So bonus for FC Dallas.
Yeah, well, they do come into town on a very, very impressive unbeaten streak. So they beat Cincinnati 7-1. They beat San Jose 3-1. They beat Montreal 2-3. Then remember they beat Dallas 1-0. Then they had 2 draws in a row at Salt Lake and then versus Vancouver, and then the aforementioned win over Portland. That's a pretty good little streak that Minnesota's gotten here, and they certainly are not the same team that we remember from last season.
Well, I mean, 12 games in all competitions, and they're actually second in the West right now. Granted, they're tied with 3 other teams on just 5 points ahead of Dallas, but they're on some run. Fortunately, the saving grace for Dallas is, hopefully the heat would affect them. Sandwiched between 2 Wednesday games, as Buzz mentioned, and they put out a full strength lineup yesterday. Robin Lode, the Finnish international, is a big signing for him. Don't think he's going to be too used to the kind of heat in Texas. So interesting Saturday.
Yeah, but Dallas, as we know, in the same 7-game span where Minnesota is 5-0-2, Dallas is 2-3-2. So 2 wins, 3 losses, and 2 draws. And certainly the draw against Salt Lake and the loss in Orlando isn't making anybody feel pretty, very good about the form of the team. But then again, This is Major League Soccer. Anything could happen. Dallas
parody rules
could totally end the streak with no problem on a hot Saturday afternoon when Minnesota's finally looking to take a game off, considering they've got the Wednesday sandwiches, as Buzz mentioned.
Yeah. Hopefully it doesn't look like the New York Red Bulls game off when they came here earlier this year.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that fun night. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, when they played their entire second team with a bunch of guys from Red Bull 2, and they just wiped the floor with Dallas.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Thanks.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thanks for reopening that wound, Buzz.
Stab.
Much appreciate it.
I'm gonna get a beer.
Yeah,
I can't cope.
Okay, so that game is at 7:00 at Toyota Stadium. Bring your ice cold towels and air hand fans and all that stuff because it's gonna
and Carly Lloyd jerseys.
And that's right, Carly Lloyd's in town. You know, unfortunately, my buddy and friend Carly hasn't slid me a DM to show up to come get my picture taken with the goods.
Would it be blurry again?
It would. Yeah. Well, we were having so much fun that day when I met Carly, and she and I
were you dancing mid selfie?
We made a tremendous friendship right on the spot that day at the SMU forum. Yeah. It was one of
real quick, you want to try and throw out a lineup out for that game?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yes, please.
Well, as I mentioned in Luchi's quote about Ferreira being a midfielder, sort of giving away the store a little bit. So that means, as we discussed, single pivot with Acosta, we would assume, and Paxton with him in the midfield. Well, that leaves you Baji as the 9 because nobody else is any good at all. Not that Baji's great, but he's better than, at this point, Coleman, Cobra, or Pepe. Santi on the left, Barrios on the right because Gassi's not getting back in anytime soon after that quote-unquote injury. And the back line is basically what I would imagine you expect it to be. Hollingshead, Ziegler, Hedges, and Cannon with Jesse and goal. So it's pretty straightforward, really. I will say that I did enjoy watching both Santi and Hollingshead in training today. They both were really sharp and on top of their game. The whole left side looked pretty good. So that gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling to watch both of those guys because those, Hollingshead has gotten better and better as the season went on, and Santi's a roller coaster. So when you see him have a really positive day, even in training, it makes you feel good about, oh, good, let's see a sharp Santi this week, and that'll be good. So there's your basic lineup, and that leaves you probably a bench of Roberts, Cervania, Hayes, Brisson, Reynolds, Maurer, and then either Cobra or Coleman. And maybe this will be the first Coleman game.
So you said something that tripped me up. Do you really think Baji's a better option than Pepe at this point?
Right now, yeah. Pepe's a 16-year-old kid. As much as we think of how great he's going to be eventually, he literally was with, he's been a pro for 5 months, and there's a lot about how you play at the MLS level that he's not quite with yet. Like if you watch him play, there's these moments of split hesitation where he's in MLS games now, mind you. And not talking about North Texas. There's these split moments where he's a split second late to react. He's not quite there in terms of like the press, when to do it, when not to do it. He's still learning those aspects of the pro game. So, obviously in the long run, Pepe's a significantly better talent, but like right this minute, if I got to win a game, I'm going to go an MLS game. I'm going to go with Baji.
All right, and I'm gonna go back on a something we just kind of made a passing joke and reference to a few minutes ago, and Dan, you seem to agree with me on this, which was the concept of Brian Acosta playing as the single holding mid, and going forward. Why don't you explain why you sound like, at least I think what I'm getting from you is that you don't think that's a good idea either.
It's just not his place. His most of his career he's played, that 8 or advanced 8, the kind of free 8 area. His positioning going forward is fantastic. Unfortunately, it leaves him completely open coming back, and especially with a single pivot. That defensive midfielder has got to support both fullbacks. You've got, they really have to cover a shed load of ground, and his tendencies are to get forward and leave space open. And, just saw a game this past week where Orlando City, who aren't a good side, just played through the middle like it was nothing. I mean, that's kind of...
Well, he wasn't there for that.
Unless... Oh, I'm not saying he was.
Okay.
I'm just saying that's the kind of the pattern of play you'd sort of expect to see. Now, could it be like a Hollingshead type deal? Hollingshead's not a great left back. But once he finally stopped being moved around and he got 6-7 games under his belt, he, really nailed down the position, was playing well, possibly, but by that time, that's the end of the season.
Yeah, I basically agree with that. For me, like what bothers me when I watch Acosta play that position is that he sort of drifts off every once in a while, and you turn around, he's 10 yards from where he should be. But when I was talking to Lucci about him a week ago, they say they have all these profiles that they do with all their metrics and stuff that say to them that he's a 6, that he's better as a 6 even than he is at an 8. So they have some confidence that he can do it. As Dan says, you got to be able to go sideline to sideline, and you got to be able to cover, 2/3 of the field vertically as well. So it's a huge ask. The only one that ever did it here phenomenally was Grezzo. Cirillo did it fairly well, but
no, you got it right the first time.
No, I didn't actually. I swear I actually watched a video of him, one of the trip to the zoo the other day, and I listened to him say his name 5 times, and he said Edwin Cirillo. I promise you. So I switched back because that's the way I used to say it. I used to say Cirillo because you guys gave me a hard time.
Caleb Montgomery situation.
Yeah, maybe because you guys gave me a hard time about calling him Cirillo all the time, and then so I changed, and then I watched that video and he said Cirillo, and I was like, dude. So I switched back. So anyway,
I think he's pranking you.
Yeah, he could be. So Cirillo, he's 18, so he's not Grezzo yet. He down the line he will be, but right now they're kind of stretching with Acosta as a single 6, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, Rucci's rolling the dice. We'll see how it works. I mean, that's the thing. This is the make or break, right? This is the thing. This move, this shift back to a 4-3-3 is going to be what gets him in or doesn't.
Right. That entire coaching staff is filled with multiple guys that do that for a living, and they possess more understanding of this game and experience in this game in their little toenail than I do in my entire existence. But every time, and I have no evidence, I have no stats, I have nothing to back this up. My eyeballs tell me when I watch Brian Acosta playing holding mid is that it's almost as if he forgets he's playing that position, and he tends to drift into other positions that I think he's better at, which is that 8 position. So back to your point, when you see him drifting out, that's exactly what I see, and I just don't see him as the ball winner that I think that job requires. Like Grezzo was an absolute Hoover vacuum of ball winning for this team, and I just don't think if you asked me what Brian Acosta's game was, ball winning wouldn't be one of those things.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said the same. I mean, I would say exactly what you just said. I agree with all that. We have to hopefully believe that. I mean, Lucci was an attacking mid or a forward, but Peter Lucene certainly knows a fair bit about how to play deep in the midfield. So hopefully they know what they're doing. This is one where I'm at. I had to say to myself, I don't see what you're seeing, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to give it 3, 4, 5 games and then see if I still agree. Just like when he talked about Ferreira and the line breaking today. Okay, I'm going to watch for that. I'm going to see if he can do what you're talking about. It'll be interesting to see. So hopefully they're getting paid the big bucks. So here we go.
Yeah. All right. So before we wrap this thing up, do we have any North Texas Soccer Club or FC Dallas Academy news that we need to pass along?
Well, they signed a player today from the academy, Emmanuel Algamware.
Maybe that was one of the 2 or 3 that.
No. This is a North Texas signing. Almaguire, I can say that right. Emmanuel is a academy player that just finished his second year as a U19. He's an outside back, normally a right, but he can play left. I just thought he was an average outside back, and then they started using him in midfield out of desperation, and he came alive. I mean, he's a significantly better 6 or 8 than he was as an outside back. And over the last, basically when they had to do that was when North Texas stole all their players. So over the last 6 months, his game has elevated tremendously, and I'm on board with him signing rather than going to college. He was going to go to Northern Illinois, which should tell you the level he's being recruited at. So I think it's a good signing. It's a perfect kind of academy player to fit into the North Texas setup. So that's a good move. And I think there's going to be a couple more actually. One of the concepts I've talked to Lucy about lately, and I wanted to bring this up because it's kind of interesting to me, is that they're kind of adverse to the idea of signing a homegrown now, unless their hands are tied in the Dante Sila situation, or if the guy's seriously ready to compete to play like Cirillo is. So other than that, they want to sign guys to North Texas deals so that they can have them down there and not eat up roster spots. And pay them to be with North Texas for a little while. So I think you might see over this fall and into the winter leading into next season, I might think you might see 2 or 3 or 4 even North Texas signings in lieu of homegrown signings, and you might see 1 or even none homegrown signings. So that's a little bit of a change from what has gone on before.
Dan, anything from the youth academies or the women's team you'd like to talk about?
The youth academy, we've seen a couple of photos come from Germany with Johan Gomez training with Augsburg, Carlos Carrasco's new club. All those pre-arranged training stints, nothing major there. But, we saw definitely a couple of people on social media saw the kits and freaked out. So, it's still going to be interesting to see, what he's doing next season, whether he is going to go to college, whether he is going to sign on, please sign on.
He's probably headed to Portland, at the University of Portland. That's his plan last time I talked to him about it. So, that's more like, not him, but talk to people about what his plans were. And this Germany thing, I think, is just a chance to do some training or whatever. I think he'll end up at the University of Portland like the plan before. I did have one other thing I wanted to talk about that Lucci mentioned today in the payoff of the lack of transfer window activity. He talked to me about how their current, one of the things they want to do, and one of the reasons why they didn't do anything is they actually have a bunch of guys they want to extend contracts to bump them up. FC Dallas is really sticklers for not saying who or how much, but he said he actually used the phrase several, or I think it was several, or it was a bunch, something like that, implying that there are these multiple players that are deserving of more money based on the amount of load or weight they're carrying and the amount of performance they're putting in for Lucci. So yeah, I think it's nice to see that them already talking about, we've got dudes here we got to reward and take care of that are outplaying their current salaries. And for a lot of the young guys, I think that's super positive because that's what they're all about now, right? Is this development and bringing guys through.
Yeah, because I had totally forgotten until we had this conversation last week, and I went and looked and found out that Thomas Roberts actually makes a considerable amount more money than Paxton does.
Yeah, when Paxton signed, the grass was a little bit different for the lay of the land was a little bit different for homegrowns, and Thomas Roberts is a highly, highly acclaimed and highly thought of, coming out of the academy, as was Paxton. But again, it was 3 years ago. So different lay of the land. And so the monies were different,
Oh, yeah. I'm not blaming anybody, but Pax is on like $100,000 deal, and Thomas Roberts is on like $180,000.
There's 4 guys right now that for sure need help, and that's one of them is Paxton. So we've talked to death about Paxton, but also Reggie Cannon, Brian Reynolds, who doesn't play a lot, but still is on a pretty low deal relative to his value, because more of a value of what other people might want to buy him for than necessarily like what he's performing at. And then the 4th one is Jesus Ferreira's on the last year of his deal of his original 3-year. Now they all have 2 years options. They could, pick them up, screw them, all that stuff. But even beyond those 4 guys, Lucci mentioned specifically that there are guys that aren't near the end of their deals even, that they feel are playing beyond what their current deal is, and they feel like those guys should be paid accordingly. They don't want to be a team that's known for stiffing people. So they want to reward guys that they bring along and develop. So I think that's really positive, actually. What both domestics and farm players, that they're going to hopefully take care of some of these guys that deserve more than they're getting.
So is this the moment where Dan Hunt offers Paxton the $1 million a year deal that I suggested?
That's not happening.
Maybe not. Okay. Yeah. So you're saying to me that Lucci is suggesting that trying to give Reggie and Pax, just those 2 guys alone, proper deals commensurate with their performance to the team is also the byproduct of that is not signing anybody else of any quality or worth anything in the transfer window.
He said that he didn't name any names, but he said that one of the reasons that they decided to wait on some of these guys was the financial considerations of what you'd have to pay for them now versus how much they would actually play. And also the fact that they want to take care of some of these guys here first, that they place a priority on their current developmental club mentality. So again, I think it's good. I think it's good that they're if they're embracing this developmental club mentality, then pay the guys appropriately. That's all I'm saying.
No, I completely agree that all those guys deserve their money and their due. But Dan, you and I both know the fan base wants this team to be competitive, and part of being competitive is paying your homegrown success stories the amount of salary that they should be making for their performance, and B is fusing next to them quality inbound players from other places, and that's the piece that's missing here, and I think we all agree probably isn't in our future.
Yeah, obviously we've seen a lot of fans turn the phrase meaningful reinforcements, impactful transfer window, the other things that Dan Hunt says to just say things back on the team. There was one line that Lucci said to Buzz earlier that kind of stuck out to me, and and it just came down to these moves being more financially feasible for us potentially for 2020. I could definitely see fans reading that and saying financially feasible. Because it doesn't fit in with a $5 budget, or now I'm sure an element of that is as Buzz was talking about, and paying players who are playing well above their current deals, but
it also includes jettisoning players that are playing below their current deals and clearing cap space. That happens this winter too.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially when you've got you've got Coleman up, you've potentially got if the Garden Snake's not guaranteed for next year, you've always got the chance with that. There's definitely a few moves that can be made. It's just the phrase is probably more impactful than Dan Hunt intended the window to be.
I'll wrap this up by saying this caveat, which is the 2019 season, we all knew, whether we wanted to admit it or not. Some of us were probably more upfront about this concept than others were willing to be, which is very young roster, very young coach, essentially an entire new front office staff in terms of anything related to the on-field product, and this was always going to be a rebuilding season. We're really, truly not going to understand the direction and the ambition and the real potential of this new setup until we get through the 2020 season.
Yeah, you could even carry that forward and even call it an evaluation season where Lucci's trying to figure out, can I play the way I want to play? What pieces am I missing? What pieces do I have? Does it work? Does it work in this league? Does it work with this roster? That's all part of it. And we all knew, everybody on this podcast went into this season with a mid-level sort of expectation, and that's all part of it.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any less frustrating or aggravating to see poor performances and crappy rosters. But
even looking a bit further away from Lucci, you've got Andre Zanota just in his first season in the job. He signed some big players for Gremio. He's got some great contacts in Brazil. He's got a couple of contacts in the US through his previous work with Traffic.
Right, but is the first evidence of his skill set Edwin Jossi?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. You've got.
I don't know. Is it?
Those are great.
I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know who would have been on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, obviously, we know he and Lucci weren't involved with the Garden Snake.
No.
And that was. How much we don't know how much firstly goes back to the plan that was put in place before Oscar left. How much of that is down to, as I noticed first few months and kind of building up those contacts. I mean, even if you look further afield within the club, you've got one player for North Texas SC that they signed in March and still hasn't made it to the country because of, the way immigration's changed. And that's an extra factor that, people have to account for in these moves now.
Hey, Dan, before we go.
No impersonations.
Excellent. No, I'm not. I had forgotten about that.
Way to go, Dan.
I totally forgot. It's time now, everybody, for Dan's.
For Peter to do karaoke.
It's time now for Dan's library of impersonations. And let's see. Who do I want you to. You know who I want you to impersonate? I want you to impersonate. Crap, his name escaped my head. The guy that scored the tying goal for Luton Town against Middlesbrough in that fascinatingly, wonderfully exciting and entertaining game that I watched the other day of your hometown team.
Thank you. That's very good.
That's a fabulous
James
game.
Collins.
Yeah, I want you to do an impersonation of Mr. Collins post-game being interviewed about his game-tying goal.
Okay, I've really got to get into this. Fucking hell, more now. That was hard work. Okay, there you go.
Did he really do that?
I have no idea.
Oh, I was going to say, that would be an awesome interview. I would love somebody
it was
to do that.
ESPN Plus on the international feed, so they just cut it dead.
I'm telling you, man, that was such a great. There was a
good
little
game.
bit of everything in that game that was so much fun to watch, and it
was so championship.
It was, but you know what? I said this on the radio show the following Saturday. Every time I flip on a championship game, they always end up being very entertaining games to watch, and I don't know why I don't watch more of the championship.
That's why a lot of people who watch the championship say it's not the best quality league in the world, but for entertainment, there's nothing better.
It was fantastic. Well, thank you for that, Dan. I appreciate you. That's another fine addition to Dan's library of impersonations.
So next week you're doing karaoke.
No. Why would we introduce a new bit? We've already got a great benchmark feature.
Because it's better.
No, Dan. Buzz and I highly disagree with you. This is fantastic stuff.
Yeah,
I didn't hear Buzz disagree.
Yeah. No, I like the Dan impressions too.
That's 2 votes to 1. We win. All right, Buzz, thank you very much. Good stuff from you. Dan, always, you're the very best. Thank you for your time and your additions to the show.
And thank you for making my mumbles sound audible.
It takes a little bit of auto-editing magic, but I do the best I can. All right. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the game this weekend. Thank you, FC Dallas fans. And we will speak to you next week on another great filled edition of Third Degree, the podcast.